On tonight's Cover One Buffalo podcast, we will be breaking down the linebacker position. But first, our guys, Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia Worldwide with Greg Tompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL. Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron,
yo,
on a scale of 1 to 10, what am I compared to how
13.
handsome Matt Milano is?
Wait, you? That's a trick question.
He's so handsome. He's
You're a handsome guy, but it's a different spectrum.
Oh God, like he's so handsome. It's crazy.
Yeah. He's handsome.
Back healthy. He's back in our lives.
He's back in our lives, and not only like there's a bunch of probably handsome dudes, but he's handsome and awesome. So
yes, it's so much more fun when you're handsome and awesome at what you do.
Yeah.
That's really, really helpful.
And that's all I got to say about the linebacking group. So we can. Thanks for coming, William Mattar. Yeah.
Matt Milano's awesome. He's back and healthy. He has a great number. Terrel Bernard could be really, really good, and we're excited about him. And he has a horrible number for a linebacker.
Let's both.
But he's really good at football. Makes it okay.
Yeah, that's all I got to say. All right.
Yeah,
good show.
Not a ton else. So we've been doing this each week, and it's a little harder with the linebackers because there's a weird analogy, and for the non-basketball fans that listening, they're not going to get it, but Aaron's going to get it, and that's all that really matters. So as a Cavs fan, in the first run with LeBron James, there was this weird stretch where we kept getting guys that I really, really wanted, but we kept getting them like 3 years after I really, really wanted them. And they would go get like Wally Szczerbiak, and he was a guy I absolutely really, really wanted. And they almost got Kevin Martin when he was an awesome shooter for Sacramento. And they got Ben Wallace. And they got a bunch of guys that like at a time was like the perfect fit of exactly the player I wanted. And I've really, really wanted both Nicholas Morrow and Deion Jones in the last couple years. And, you know, on one hand, both of them, I think one's going to be on our roster and one's going to be on our practice squad. And they're both a better bet than what calling AJ Klein to cancel his family vacation and get off the couch and come play for us in the playoffs was. So it's better, but I'm gonna kind of hold myself from being excited, even though they're both players I really wanted at one point. I don't know if they're who they used to be.
I was gonna say, is that gonna be I can't wait to find out who you have making. That's gonna be a tough battle for you on.
Yeah. I have a lot of equity built up in those guys.
Emotional investment. So with the analogy, in that Cavs run, would Von Miller be our Ilgauskas? I guess like towards the end of his, because I think people forget how good Ilgauskas
Z was really,
good.
Really good.
But in the LeBron years, he was kind of at the end of being like really good.
It's actually probably more like Tristan Thompson was never good enough, but he was there at the championship. It's probably Shaq. Shaq was on the Cavs and was awesome and like one of the best players ever, which Von Miller is. Von Miller is one of the greatest pass rushers ever, but we didn't quite get that version and got kind of a broken down version that was really good for the little bit he was healthy. So we'll see when that comes back. We talked last week about that. With the last couple of weeks, we've played the two Buffalo Bills and a lie. I can't really do that here because there's only one that's actually a guy that you wouldn't know. UB fans know the name Joe Andreessen. Obviously, I won't lie, I didn't watch a lot of UB football, but I know some people were excited about him. I think he's a guy that will be fighting for a practice squad spot. I don't think he has a very direct shot competing for a roster spot, but Deion Jones and Nicholas Morrow are both older guys, and I do think we'll get to that later in the show. I do think 6 guys can make it. We've got 5 locks. The name that I certainly am not familiar with, and that most fans won't, is Shane Simon. Just a player that is signed as an undrafted free agent out of Pitt, and also probably just fighting maybe for a practice squad spot, unlikely. So out of the guys, before we get into the 5 that I think all of us agree are roster locks, who do you think has the best shot out of those guys to make the roster? Or I guess, do you think Baylon Spector should be in that group, or do you think he should be in the top 5?
I have Baylon Spector in the top 4, and
Yeah,
then
same.
the line.
I
Go.
will say Ulofoshio was drafted higher than him. I don't know how that factors into likelihood of who you could sneak onto a practice squad, but I
Sure.
think day one, who lines up in what order on the
In
depth
camp, sure.
chart, I agree that Baylon Spector is a step ahead of Ulofoshio. When it comes to cut down day, if for some reason both Morrow and Deion Jones were awesome and they had to pick cutting one, I do think there's a slightly better chance of sneaking Baylon Spector to a practice squad than there is
Sure.
Ulofoshio.
Yeah, I got to see him. And that's the unknown aspect of Ulofoshio is I think the team is high on Baylon Spector. I mean, even last year in camp, the problem for him has been staying healthy and
Yeah.
availability, and having that availability is going to be probably something that plays a role in whether or not that he's that 4 or 5 looking on the outside type of guy. But I think the team's high on him. They're high on his special teams ability, which we've talked a ton about with the new special teams rules. I think linebacker is going to come into play quite a bit in that new special teams look. And so I think they're hoping that he probably stays healthy and he can be that guy that takes over for Manikevich, that takes over for that loss of a Saran Neal type special teams player. Because that's really, after he was drafted, people were like, where does he fit? And it was really special teams primarily, and then developing into linebacker. But he got legit looks. Obviously, Terrel Bernard's injury in camp allowed him to get some legit looks, but he was getting some legit looks to rotate into that competition last year at camp.
I feel like he has the upside of being what Terrell Dodson was before last year,
Sure.
where he was just the third run stuffing thumper that would come in base sets when you need a guy to be a third linebacker, but that you don't really want him isolated out in coverage or as the 2 linebackers in what is the new base, nickel with Terrence Johnson. I feel like that's, I don't want to say ceiling because you never know how a guy could develop, but I kind of feel like that's his ceiling. Is the best case scenario is he would be a third linebacker and goal line short yardage, because he is a big athletic dude. And I do feel like he's okay coming downhill, coming forward. And as weird as it sounds, he is a relatively speedy athlete, like straight line stuff,
he
which
is.
translates on special teams. But the short area quickness and reaction just hasn't been there from a coverage standpoint. So I think your comp of Matakevich, and then, hey, could he push, Dorian Williams? Could he push Ulofoshio or whoever makes the roster out of Morrow or Jones for that like short yardage base set guy? I think he's in that competition.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
And I do think he's realistically a lock. I don't think I think it's a very low percentage chance that he doesn't make this roster.
Yeah, I agree. And this is what's going to be the interesting kind of like shuffling that they do here at camp with this back half. Because it's super top heavy. And all these guys, I don't really want to see on the field. And that's another conversation we can have in terms of, there's been a lot of discussion about what do they do with these offenses moving a little bit bigger. It's not just the Bills getting into 12 personnel. And we've seen offenses kind of bully that nickel look of the Bills and trying to get Taron Johnson off the field. Do they bring in a Dorian Williams? But my thing is, I don't want to see any of these guys really that much in any serious amount of way outside of Milano and Bernard. And so how do they balance? We know Dorian Williams is probably that next in line, and we'll talk about what he needs to do to earn some of our confidence in getting on the field, because there's a lot of traits there. But these guys behind that, they are all very flawed, whether it's age, catching up with them. Like, if you, to your point of wanting Deion Jones 3-4 years ago, you throw him into this defense, like then I'm having conversations of, we can take Taron Johnson off the field a little bit and bring in a guy like that, because he is that modern day linebacker that can cover and move around. But where's he at now? right? Like, and that type of age and flaw, where's that at? Same with Morrow. Like,
Yeah.
he doesn't have what he used to have, and he probably has some real value on special teams. And to your point, yes, it's better than dragging in AJ Klein or God forbid having to play a Manikavich for sure. And you want those guys as security blankets on your roster and in that practice squad. But juggling the youth of a Baylon Spector and the Ulofoshio versus the Morrow and Deion Jones, and how does that shake out here in camp, I think is probably one of the more intriguing lines, because I don't think you're keeping, I don't know. We keep saying on the high end, every time we're at one of these roster spots, we're talking about keeping the high end of offensive linemen, of wide receivers, and one of these groups is going to lose out.
Correct. And we've seen the last couple of years, it's been 5. It used to be 6 in McDermott's first like 3 or 4 years. He and Bean kept 6 linebackers. The last 2 years, they've kept 5. And as nickel has become the true base, and as Taron Johnson has become just such a staple in the defense, they've gone to 5. So now, not only, do we have slightly different depth in the secondary, we have slightly different depth in different spots. And obviously we've talked about over and over again, I know one of the guys brought it up in the chat here, we could talk about the new kickoff rule and the impact it has on just about all these position groups. And it'll come up again next week with DBs. It is a factor here because a lot of smart people, again, I'm not taking credit for this, a lot of really smart people have projected that one of the positions it translates most importantly to is linebacker, because it's very much like a zone running play, and having guys who are used to shedding a block to make a short area tackle is different than the, traditional Taiwan Jones, like, hey, I'm going to run in a straight line and then dive at a guy's ankles or make a big hit after running 40 yards. And you're trying to like fight away those kind of blocks. Whereas this is going to be much, much different. So I'm curious to see how that nets out and what that equates to, but we'll see where that goes. I saw a couple of people ask like, hey, are we going to see like backup offensive linemen on the kickoff team now, literally running zone run blocking schemes? There's all kinds of things that are going to be interesting to see.
Teams are going to toy with all that stuff.
I think there's at a minimum, a lot of tight ends and fullbacks are going to be on that unit for sure. But if you start having backup, if you have some really athletic offensive linemen in that space, you have to have a linebacker. They'll maul a corner or a small receiver or somebody who used to be on a coverage unit. You need it to be a linebacker. So before we move on to the top guys, I made the comments I did because Nicholas Morrow used to be a top coverage linebacker. The year he became a free agent coming out of Las Vegas, he was my number one like Goldilocks pick because he wasn't going to break the bank, but he was coming off an incredible coverage season. And when I was worried we were going to lose Milano, I wanted him. Right after that, we ended up re-signing Milano, so it ended up not being a big issue because he got really close to free agency. And then unfortunately, a double dip, not only did we not need him, he blew out his ACL that season when he first signed and was in Chicago. So then it ended up, he wasn't the same player and we didn't need it. Deion Jones was different. Deion Jones was at least one tier, maybe multiple tiers above there, because Deion Jones was an all-pro at one point. He was in Atlanta. I described him as the prototypical modern day linebacker. Like he was what you wanted, where he could cover sideline to sideline. He could still come up and hit. He had seasons with, 150 tackles while he was also arguably the best coverage linebacker in the NFL. And it's just hard to know, he's about to turn 30 during this season. And his last year in Atlanta and his one season in Cleveland were rough, like really, really bad. Last year, there were some flashes in Carolina that it wasn't quite as bad as it was previously. And I think that was more so in the way that Terrell Dotson looked good for us, where we were smarter with the usage and that we didn't put him in positions where he was isolated out in space with a wide receiver or someone really fast. So that gives me a little bit of hope that, hey, maybe I think he could be the safety blanket for if Dorian Williams doesn't take a step forward that we want as that third linebacker in base sets, because he's so smart and knows all those things and still has that short burst, even if it's not the longer speed that we had previously. But again, all of those are better than calling a guy off the couch who was about to go on vacation with his family. So, and Ulofoshio, I don't think we're going to spend a ton of time on here tonight. He's a guy who had a lot of really nice flashes in college, is a really athletic, fast guy. I think it's going to translate, I think, pretty directly on special teams. I think he's going to be a really nice special teams player. And then I think he has some upside from a coverage linebacker standpoint, where if he hits, again, this is similar to, it's a little different than Baylon Spector, where if he hits, it's still limited because even his high-end skill set doesn't translate to coverage in space. Ulofoshio does, where it really translates to coverage in space. However, I don't know how high the likelihood is that it's going to hit. So all those guys, I think, are competing for, 2 roster spots at best. 3 if you include Baylon Spector, but probably it's 5th round picks don't get cut. Ulofoshio is going to make the team. And then it's, can Deion Jones or Nicholas Morrow show enough that they're both on the roster instead of both being practice squad veterans that we call up, break glass in case of emergency. If they both are iffy but good enough to keep around, it would probably be like, hey, if we cut you guys, you don't have to get claimed. We get to just sign you on the practice squad. We don't want to cut a young guy, so we're going to keep a young offensive lineman or defensive lineman or extra receiver rather than exposing them to waivers, and we'll just cut you guys and bring you back later on. Any different thoughts before we talk about the top 4?
Yeah, no, I think this conversation about Ulofoshio is really just reminded me of last week when we talked about Javon Solomon, and same round pick and same kind of idea. And I would just urge fans, I haven't heard as much on him as I did on Solomon, and even
more excitement and buzz about Solomon.
There is. And even this week when I was talking about some of the stuff on Edge in our Discord and stuff like that, people were like, well, what about Solomon? Like, where does he fit in? And I don't see it as much with Ulofoshio, but I will warn people that feel that way. Like, this also feels like a project to me, but one that can give you the dividends. Like you said, you're not going to get a 5th round pick cut. You can get the dividends on a more important special teams this year. So I think those picks are good, and you can continue to develop those guys. But I would say give that a couple years to sit and develop behind a Matt Milano, behind Bernard, and still behind Dorian Williams. We saw Dorian Williams has everything you want, or what the Bills are looking for and what they want in athleticism to be a linebacker in this defense and in this modern defense. But we saw the transition for him, even with all those traits and all that ability, and how lost he looked at times in the NFL. And that's probably where we'll segue to here as we kind of move up this linebacking roster, is that ultimately the only other linebacker I want to see on the field this year for the Buffalo Bills playing like a real linebacker snaps is going to be Dorian Williams. But I don't want it to be I want it to be the Dorian Williams that has taken a step and is maybe still has the crazy athleticism, but is slowing down the athleticism to speed up the processing, if that makes sense. And to be able to see the field and see the play, because he was, when that whole conversation was happening with Klein, do we bring in Klein or all that stuff? And everyone was like, dude, just throw Dorian Williams on the field because it can't get any worse. It was bad at times seeing him running around on the field and just missing. You were better off with a slower AJ Klein, a little bit slower to get to the ball because he was processing the play correctly, versus Dorian Williams maybe getting the right process play, or maybe zipping off in the other direction, totally out of the play.
Over pursuing, flying by the ball and giving up a huge play. And again, there was no good sign, and they did defer to a more conservative trust with a veteran player versus a guy that very obviously had not earned their trust. However, we have seen big steps forward in the second year, and a guy who is very young. He just turned 23. So he was, 22 his entire rookie year. We have seen big steps forward, and especially when it's a guy who is really athletic and playing aggressively, it is a little easier to help that slow down in the processing and understanding than it is to spur guys to become more aggressive. It's usually easier to dial that back and to make it more intelligent and better utilized than it is the other way around. So right now, my guess is that the top 3 become very defined, and that it's very clearly the 2 gentlemen we haven't talked about yet, plus Dorian Williams, and that he's the one who comes in on short yardage and goal line and base sets, and that he's also a core special teamer, and that he takes on the full Terrell Dodson role that we had previously as the 3rd linebacker, plus the first backup at both spots. And ideally, he comes in and clearly earns that from a trust standpoint, because his skill set, his athleticism has never been in question. It's been his processing, his understanding, his ability to call the plays. They had to take away the green dot. Like, he couldn't call the plays. They had to find somebody else to come in and call the plays. He was just swimming in it. And that's not a shot at him or his intelligence or his capability. That happens to a ton of rookies. Like, that's a ton to process and take in all at once.
Yeah.
We need to now see that coming into this second year, that he's ready to do that and ready to take those on.
It's because it's not fair to him to say, like, I don't want it to come off as though I'm dumping on Dorian Williams, because really there was a lot of guff given to the Bills for that pick, because he had an undersized linebacker in Bernard, and you had Milano, and the people are like, what are we doing? But really now, looking at it a couple years later, if he works out and if he continues to develop, this is the perfect situation, right? Because you have three crazy athletic guys, so he can be that third linebacker, like you said, bring in a bit of a bigger body. But Matt Milano has had injury issues, and he has missed time.
Yeah, and like it or not, even if he's back and healthy, he's gonna turn 30. Like, he's
totally, yeah.
Like, he turned 29 in March. Like, he's gonna turn 30 not that long from now.
Looks good for 30. But so in the best case scenarios, you have a really good backup, to your point, that can play both positions, and you don't lose the athleticism. And in the best case scenario is he continues to develip, and when that conversation comes up, he becomes
hopefully that's
plan.
3 years from now, 4 years from now. But it is coming at some, Father Time is undefeated. Like, it is coming for everybody. He will need to be, and is just the typical new. That's a great one. How cool if Dorian Williams turns out to be Bernard 2.0? It'd be amazing.
Well, Bernard didn't start right away. He wasn't thrust into the position. Matt Milano even took time to earn the trust of the coaches late in that first season.
Ramon Humber was the AJ Klein.
Absolutely. And so I think we have to let him develop. And he also got thrown into a pretty weird situation where Tremaine Edmonds was out. There was a big void at middle linebacker. Bernard gets hurt. They're like, we don't really want to put him as the middle linebacker. But then they were in this weird spot in camp. They gave him a green dot, started working him as. So his even introduction to this team, everything was just thrown at him. Now he's had a full off season to process. Right. I'm the one podcast that I try to always make it a point to listen to is Eric Woods, centered on Buffalo. He brings in a lot of coaches, a lot of staff, a lot of people within the building. And he had Babich on a couple weeks ago. And one of the things he was talking about other players was what they give them. And I trusted Babich explicitly, and McDermott, the tools that they give them on stuff to work on in the offseason. I'm sure they took a lot off Dorian Williams' plate that was thrust on him immediately and worked on that. Like, all right, dude, this is where you were all over the place, and we got to simplify this for you and get it to a point where you're not doing so much. And I think that we'll see a big step forward just in not so much being put on his plate right out of the gate, walking into the door. Now Milano and Bernard are healthy. He doesn't have to come in and feel antsy about learning the entire playbook and being the starter. Like, he can sit back and develop the way he's supposed to.
100%. And Mike here talking about from last week's show, having depth at one tech this year, where we have hopefully a healthy Daquan Jones plus an Austin Johnson, really puts us in a spot to keep those linebackers clean, because as he says, they are undersized, and in today's NFL, that can be a challenge. And having a bigger capable, having defensive ends the size of Gregory Rousseau and Dwayne Smoot, like, that is much different than,
especially as offenses are making that shift now, right? Like, we're not at the cusp where all offenses are doing it, but some of the top offenses, the Bills included, Miami,
more tight ends,
San Francisco, they're getting bigger. They're running the ball. They're moving these littler linebackers and corners around. And so having that line in front of you makes it a little bit harder to get to, for sure.
Yeah. So as we talk about the top two guys, I was playing around pre-show because I knew that Terrel Bernard had a really nice season last year as a starter. He played, every single game, was out there. He ended up with 143 tackles. He ended up with 10 tackles for a loss, 9 quarterback hits, 6.5 sacks, 3 fumble recoveries, 5 passes deflected, 3 interceptions. Just an incredible season. I started to play around, like, there can't be that many guys who have done that kind of stuff in history. And I didn't pick every single one of them, but some of the key ones of interceptions, fumble recovery, so turnovers, the turnovers, sacks, and a lower threshold of tackles, just to see how many were there. Because when I first did it, only 2 guys came up because I put, like, his full amount of tackles. And I came up with what ended up being a handful of these statistics here, and it goes through the numbers. Let me make it a little bit bigger so everybody can see. So I simply picked those 4, and I picked sacks at 6 because he had 6 sacks, interceptions at 3, fumble recoveries at 3, and I just put 80 tackles. And the only guys in NFL history who have done that are Greg Lloyd, Seth Joyner, Richard Dent, and oddly, Antoine Winfield and Terrel Bernard last year. So just it kind of puts into context how incredible of a season he had from a big splash play, impact play standpoint. Always the biggest bugaboo from Tremaine Edmonds. Edmonds did a lot of the little things, and we and others at Cover One spent a lot of time defending him. But even us, we did have to acknowledge that, like, yeah, he doesn't really make a ton of the big splash plays. We'd love to see more of those. And to have Terrel Bernard come in and not only say, to make some of the nice, base plays that are needed, because he did all that stuff really cleanly and really well, but to make that many huge splash plays was just a really, really welcome sight. So, I'm
So we got
excited
to get
see
him
what
fit
he
for a
does
Hall
in
of
the,
Fame coat,
well,
yellow jacket.
obviously, I
golden
mean,
jacket.
he did what only other Hall of Famers have done. So
Yeah,
that's
agree.
very clearly the only alternative. So I'm excited to be able to see what he does here in this second year, started in his third year overall. But right there, as Ron says, Bernard is a playmaker, and he is.
Mhm.
He truly is.
Yeah, to add on to that a little bit, everybody knows I love PRP, which is it combines sacks, hits, hurries relative to how often they're rushing the passer, which is much more for your defensive ends and
Oh
stuff
yeah.
like that. Linebackers aren't always rushing; they're dropping into coverage a ton. He was number 1 in linebackers according to PFF and PRP at 17.5. That's
Which
top
is a
of the NFL.
ridiculous number. It's a
Yeah.
ridiculous number.
Yeah, and then 10th in total pressures among linebackers, first in sacks, 15th in tackles, 13th in stops, 4th in interceptions. Really, it was 3 guys tied for number 3, so he was really second. But so he's a playmaker, he's a turnover machine. My real interest is in, I know he's good. I think he can play like that. I think he continue to be disruptive. I think he continue to wreak havoc. We didn't really get to see him and Matt Milano really play
Yeah.
together and develop together. And Matt Milano's the same kind of guy. If you go look at Matt Milano's stats from the previous year, it was 5 sacks, 3 interceptions, same type of player. Of you look at the way they blitz and attack, the type of chaos they create, the type of when they pull their trigger, Bernard is just as good of a processor in the run game as Matt Milano is. And we talk about those one techs that they're going to be playing in front of, that rotation of one techs and the disruption we talked about last week that Ed Oliver gives you in the middle. The sky's the limit in my brain. I put out a post earlier this week, Greg, talking about, as I'm thinking about the line last week and preparing for this linebacker group this week. And then I'll throw Taron Johnson in this front 7 because I'll cheat for the sake of content, but he's got that linebacker responsibility. And when you look at this front 7 with these 2 linebackers and what we talked about last week in front of them and what we know Taron Johnson as an all-pro can do, if healthy, if Matt Milano can stay healthy, if Von Miller comes back somewhat healthy, tell me there's 3 to 4 units better than that in the NFL, and I'll argue you. I have a good case that it's not, with what they can do in my brain, what I know that Bobby Babich and Sean McDermott can drum up and do with this unit. And I think it starts with these 2 guys. And I put out a post this week, and I want to get your opinion on this. Since Sean McDermott arrived, he brought in Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde. The identity of this Bills defense has been, one of the shows on our network is called Disguised Coverage. And it really, I don't think anything's going to change on the back end with what Sean McDermott does back there. He's going to still mix those guys around, do that stuff. But those 2 players made this defense special. And it was a threat to offensive coordinators, kept people up at night. People didn't even throw on them. I think we're about to see the transition of what makes this defense special, and some of the games they can play won't be the dropping of safety. They'll still do that stuff, but what it's going to be is who's coming, who's blitzing, who's dropping back into coverage in your linebacker group. I think the transition is now going to go to your linebackers being interchangeable in the games that Babich and McDermott can play with those guys in the middle of the field. And I think that's going to be this defense's new identity, as we saw McDermott get more aggressive, blitzing a lot of these guys last year as Poyer and Hyde were aging out. Am I crazy thinking that, like, this is now a big transition in what we're going to see from this defense, and those are the linchpins now?
I think it was a really, really great call out, and I hadn't really thought of it in that context. That we had them as the baseline and that safety blanket, and really the identity of this defense for a long, long time. And often the back end coverage was making up for some of the gaps in the front end. And you had a really good post about this might be the best front seven that we've had in a while, especially if you include Taron Johnson. And he basically is that third linebacker in most of our base sets. That it really is the best front seven we've had in a long, long time. And I think having those two as the core identity of this defense is real. I really think, especially if you include Taron Johnson and that middle three in the center of that defense, that is the identity of this defense now. It really is. And I know, Ed Oliver's kind of coming into his own, and we, obviously Von Miller's still a huge name, but until some of those other guys become a little bit more solidified and really step into who the longer term, hopefully Cole Bishop is the longer term guy at safety, but it really does help speak to what they could be. And I had to play around here because as you brought it up that Matt Milano's had some of those crazy good seasons, I wanted to play with some of the other statistical pieces of what was there. And if you look at the season that Milano had, where it was 2 fumble recoveries, he had sacks too, he had 3 interceptions, the tackles that he had. Now that list still includes Terrel Bernard and Matt Milano, along with Brian Urlacher, Ray Lewis, still Antoine Winfield season, just the incredible season that those
the type of guys, yeah.
It really shows the kind of company that they're keeping with those kind of things. Just an incredible list to be a part of, and it shows how special what they've done, and now hopefully we get to see it at the same time.
And somebody brought up a really cool point to me too of and I gotta get it back on Twitter, and I'll shout it out later on Twitter because I'm gonna forget whose handle it was, but I talked about this new identity of this team, and they talked about Sean McDermott kind of cut his teeth with some of the best safeties in football in Philly, and then came to Carolina and then got Kuechly and Thomas, and then it was a linebacker centric defense there. And so this wouldn't be the first time he's transitioned to having all pro level safeties and the defense really being dominated by Brian Dawkins, one of the best safeties ever. And your defense is dominated by mixing stuff up there and then coming into another defense and doing it with linebackers. So he knows how to sort of transition. I think we pigeonhole Sean McDermott into what type of defense that he is, but he really does know how to play with the tools that he's got.
For sure. And so talking kind of in similar to what you did about the new identity for the defense, and when I had a chance to go on with Zach and those guys in WGR, it was talking about if there's anything that we're just going to kind of default to giving them benefit of the doubt, it's in coaching the secondary and being able to build out of what's there. So,
and is there a better bloodline of linebackers than Babich bloodline of he could pick up his dad at any point. He was saying on Centered in Buffalo podcast that his dad every night after games, when he retired, he took a bunch of the sheets they use as coaches to write notes during the game. He took a bunch of them with him when he retired, and every day he calls his son after the games and has questions and did you guys mean to do this and this look and coverage? And so awesome. That type of line, what Bobby has right now at the linebacker room gets his dad excited, and there's a lineage of great linebacking coaching right here in Buffalo, and they're going to get the most out of these guys.
100%. And having that knowledge base as just literally just a bonus cheat code because your dad's going to call you and give that is just immeasurable in how nice and how beneficial that is to him as a first-time defense coordinator. And I know a lot of people have asked about they've been very coy about the comments of who's calling the defense. It's been very, very clear that the intention is to give it to Bobby Babich. However, they also don't want to jump the gun, and they want to make sure it's clear that yes, he feels comfortable with it. McDermott feels comfortable in him doing it. So the easier way to discuss that is how they're doing it, rather than if they say, well, yeah, of course he's a new defense coordinator, he's going to call the plays, and then they have to dial it back and figure out. The media
will kill it.
Oh my God. I thought you said he was going to call it. Instead, he's making him earn it and all the other cliches that go along with that. Yeah. I know our guy Kyle Trimble was really excited about the video of Matt Milano at the offseason last mini camp, and that he was moving around really well without a brace, doing some of the tackle intros on the big weighted donut that they roll and pick up. All those other pieces looked really, really good. It's been really, really helpful to be able to do it that way. So, I think if we talk about anything to be the, it's hard because there weren't a lot of additions that are going to change, but for my, William Mattar here to help, it's simply the return of Matt Milano and having him back healthy and seeing those clips of him moving around without the brace, without those other pieces. What's here to help is the idea of seeing Matt Milano and Terrel Bernard together healthy on the field at the same time for a sustained period with that strong front seven in front of them, or front four in front of them. Like, I think that it really, really is exciting about what this could be.
Yeah, and I get comments every single time. Like today when I posted about this group kind of changing the identity of this defense is Matt Milano going to lose a step? And that injury looked devastating. It felt devastating because we lost Matt Milano. But it's not like the typical, like a ligament damage. And
Correct.
it seemed to be a fracture. Time. And so, yes, it's time. It's regaining the muscle strength that you lost, but he looks good. His thighs look as good as they ever have. And he's still got quite a bit of time here. The real football doesn't ramp up for another 13 days. They've just been going through the motions of the practice stuff and the strength and conditioning. So he's taking the right approach. Everything Sean McDermott has said, and even Brandon Beane, when asked about it, is he was always a hungry dude, and one of the, the cliches, he was always in here first and all that stuff, but that he looks hungrier than ever, and that they're trying to kind of keep him in line with it. Like, nobody wants to be back more than Matt Milano does, and they're like almost pumping the brakes on him of like, hey, let's just take it easy. There's no rush here. We got a lot of time left here, and it's not like he's competing for his job. He just has to make sure that he's healthy enough to get out there. And I respect Kyle Trimble's opinion on this stuff a lot, and I'm very excited to know that he's healthy. And this injury also isn't the kind that, like, when you do tear an ACL, there's a huge risk of the other ACL tearing or other injuries coming along because you rush back. It seems like this is
compensatory injuries.
This one's sort of an isolated thing. And as long as he's healed properly from it and they've got the clear go ahead, that he should be fine to go. It's not going to slow him down. It's not going to change his athleticism. And those should be all things that are exciting because he is coming towards, like you said, he's hitting. There could be a wall he hits in the next 2 to 3 years of age athleticism, but this injury isn't going to be the why. Right.
Correct. 100%. And I think even other like really high end players that had great coverage ability and all the different pieces, I'll use Bobby Wagner because that's the level of player that Matt Milano, is and has played at. Is we think about he has lost a step now, but he just finished his age 33 season. So that's like 4 seasons from now. So that's,
we just got to get to 3.
This is Matt Milano's age 29 season. Right. And we have the extension of his age 29, 30, and then technically his 31 season, but we'll see where that goes. We have him under contract the next 3 years. That was all while Bobby Wagner was still playing at an elite all-pro level before we saw any drop-off. So I think that, linebacker is a little bit different here. We'll see where that goes, but all indications are that he's still playing at a very, very high level.
I love that, man. Thanks, William Mattar, for helping us get excited about this.
He's here to help. With that in mind, listen out here for our guy Bill talking and sharing with you what you can do if you find yourself in an unfortunate situation.
If you've been in a car crash, you should know this. At William Mattar, there's no fee until we win. That means you don't pay us unless we win your case. If you're hurt in a car, call William Mattar, 444-4444.
So
real talk. And I do got one other thing here with William. It reminded me, real talk. If you're not following William Mattar on social media, you got to do. Now my wife sends me the Instagram reels of like, there was one where it was the guy being carried in a stretcher and they drop the stretcher and the guy rolls off and then it's William Mattar rolls in. He's like, hurt in a car, call William Mattar. And my wife sent me that one. She's like, I'm literally dying right now in like the waiting room at a doctor's appointment looking at this. Like, she sends me all the time. She's like, he's the funniest. It's the best. So follow them. that should be the next instead of the commercial, we should just get the like best of their
whatever his
Instagrams and run
transitions.
those. Yeah.
Like the transition videos that they do. And two, he's an incredibly good sport. Like some of them are like huge waves, and they like he lets
Splash 'em
them
with water.
throw a huge bucket of water
Yeah.
at him. And like he does so many things that he like you have to be like pretty comfortable in your own skin and like
Definitely.
pretty comfortable being the butt of the joke. Like he's a really good sport with a lot of these, and it's funny. Like they do, he obviously needs to lean into it, like the dancing that they get him to do. But like the social media team that he's built around him are some really sharp people. Like it's really, really good stuff.
Yeah, they're killing it. So follow them on Instagram and Twitter or wherever you're at.
Yeah, it's a good time. All right, this is an easy show because we hope that two guys play all the time. We don't see anybody else, and it's going to be a ton of fun to be able to see them. Because if those two are out there all season, it's going to be really special. I'm not going to even dredge up what would have happened if those two were still on the field at the end of last season. But it's a really exciting way to be able to look at this team. And next week will be our last position preview before we get into training camp and all the fun of that. So one last show, and it's your wheelhouse here. We're going to talk about adequate and above adequate cornerback or defensive back play.
I was gonna say, yeah, you got to throw them all in there. We're going to be talking about defensive backs, and I'm excited, man. I'm a little more excited about this front seven, including Taryn in there, and I think
It's
I'm
the first time
starting
it's
to
been
get
flipped that way.
yeah, but I'm starting to get a little bit frustrated, Greg, and I don't want to be this fan that is like, the national media doesn't give us enough credit, but they're not. Especially when it comes to the defensive side of the ball.
So many are out on us. So many are out on us.
Not even just as a whole
we lost
team.
names, but we didn't. They weren't those guys anymore.
I love Poyer and Hyde and what they did for
Yes.
everything we had in Buffalo. But dude, the way I hear people talking about like they lost, they're decimated, I've heard on defense. And I'm here putting these together. And yes, I am a fan and for sure have biases that come through. But in getting these shows together on the defensive side of the ball, right. I was like excited for the offense. Josh Allen's fun. There's some cool weapons. I think it's gonna work. But doing these last two shows, like I cannot wait to see what Babich and McDermott cook up with this defense. Cause I do think, to your point of pressure helps coverage and it's greater than coverage. Like the ways you can get it with this front seven is really fun. And I'm getting very excited. And the national media just seems to be missing out on the boat here right now. And I love that for us. Keep us under the radar.
First time we've been flying under the radar in a long time. Everybody picking us as their Super Bowl champ. I did not like that. It was very uncomfortable being everybody dismissing us and how many chips that's going to let Sean McDermott put on how many shoulders. I am all aboard that train. So
yeah.
All right, guys.
Real quick. I'm not going to be on, but producer Chris is going to be on tomorrow with David Tilton, Money from the Air Raid Hour. They're going to be on the Cover One Buffalo Golf Cover One Golf, not Cover One Buffalo, Cover One Golf podcast. Check it out. They're going to be talking about golf trip destinations, talking a little bit about the Scottish Open, which started here today. Golf's starting to ramp back up here to another major coming up. And so check those guys out. 9 a.m. tomorrow. They'll be streaming live on Twitter, YouTube, wherever you're catching streams. So check those guys out.
It's a very educational show, as a good example is I just learned that the Scottish Open is a thing that exists. So you guys can learn more too if you listen to that show as well.
That's right.
All right.
Greg knows
Thank
golf.
you guys.
That's going to be your next hashtag.
I could add that to the list of things that I don't really know. All right, guys. Thank you, everybody. On behalf of awesome producer Chris Kepner and Aaron Quinn, I'm Greg Tompsett. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.